Hello, my name is Dr. Brian Curtis, and I'm a paleontologist here at Fossil Crates. And today I want to talk about Suchomimus and Cristatusaurus. Are they the same animal? Let's dig into what the evidence suggests. So we'll roll the clock back. For those of you not familiar, there is a spinosaurid called Cristatusaurus, the crested lizard. And though it was named in 1998, 2 months before the Suchomimus paper dropped, the actual bones of Cristatusaurus have been found long ago, back as early as 76. There's references of it by Takei, and there's even images of it in the 80s. And we'll take a look at those here. And what is it? Yeah, I don't even know. Well, that was the mystery. No one knew at the time. In fact, this paper misidentifies them and calls it a genera when these are actually premaxillae. And where they were found was in Niger, but where they were found in relation to each other, I'm not entirely clear. If someone else knows or if I missed it, my apologies. I'd love to know. Either way, it was named, and 2 months later, Paul Serino and team named Suchomimus. Now, Cristatusaurus was named from one holotype and one referred specimen. The holotype was a younger individual based on the suture, and the other one is the adult, which is a better preserved specimen. So I'm not sure why they used a younger specimen. Most people today would not use a young anything as a holotype, but that's what they did. And to ground this whole conversation, the holotype is really the only bone that matters because that's the name-bearing bone. And if you want to know if you found something, you pick up the holotype and you say, does my bone look like what the holotype looks like? So for the purposes of this conversation, I'm going to name this bone here. It's the GDF 366 leap year, and leap year is the holotype of Cristatusaurus. And year, specimen 365, is the referred specimen in better shape that shows this crest off where it got its name. Now, fast forward to 2 months later, and Suchomimus is named. Now, this is all we had to work with, and it looks like a great specimen. Oh my goodness. But right out of the gate, there was a lot of conundrums from the paleontological community because we see this great skeletal overview. But if you look at what was actually listed for the specimen, the holotype is declared to be GDF 500, which it says is a partial disarticulated skeleton. It doesn't list what bones are for GDF 500. It's a mystery. And the rest of this paper talks about the holotype paper, GDF 501, which is this beautiful partial skull. And they refer it to Suchomimus. So when I read this paper, up until just a few days ago, I always thought that there was some cranial material in GDF 500. And we just used GDF 501 because it was better, but it was the same. Now, nowhere in this paper does it say where GDF 501 comes from. Is it from the same hole in the ground, or is it hundreds of miles away? We don't know. Just like the first specimen with the Cristatusaurus, we don't know. And that's maddening. If you publish something, please tell us where it all comes from. And give us a list of the specimen numbers, not and many other bones and teeth. Now, the rest of this science, or this paper here, which was made lots of splash, talks only about the skull, and they borrow the missing elements from baryonyx, and it says other Niger material. And if you see in this here, they do list a few other elements that they're referring. We don't know if there's only one taxon, one species living in this time period, in this space in Niger. So the assumption that both Takei and Russell made in their naming Cristatusaurus is that they're conspecific. These are the same species of animal. And Serino and crew are making the exact same assumption that all of these bones go to the same species of animal. But there's always the possibility that there are multiple species of spinosaur living at the same time. So right out of the gate, both papers are fraught with some basic assumptions. Now, they're not bad assumptions, they're logical, but we know that there are often more than one kind of theropod living in the same space. Just think of the Morrison Formation. You've got Torvosaurus, Allosaurus, Marshallsaurus, Dorxosaurus, Tanacolagrius. The list goes on. And if you look at the late Cretaceous, you have Nanotyrannus, you have Tyrannosaurus. And if you go into the Dinosaur Park Formation, you've got Albertosaurus, the Spletosaurus. You have Gorgosaurus. You've got all of these theropods living together. So it does make you ponder, is that the right move? But that's what the literature, the holotypes were set as, so that's what we go with. Now, without giving us information on GDF 500, we can't say anything about it whatsoever. We see this great skeleton, and the assumption was there would be papers and monographs coming out describing the rest of this. So for the purposes of this conversation, which is Suchomimus, what did Suchomimus? Well, Suchomimus, to Paul's credit, he's an incredible showman. He's a fantastic paleontologist and a wonderful finder, one of the greatest ever to live. And he had this skull constructed with the skeleton. And voila, we have this incredibly cool spinosaurid walking around with his mouth replete with teeth. Beautiful. But then if you look at the paper, we're making the assumption that that skull, this GDF 501, goes with the specimen GDF 500. So we're going to make that statement, and we're going to look at this Cristatusaurus, because another component of naming dinosaurs is the first one named wins. So there's always been this back channel that maybe Cristatusaurus is the proper name for Suchomimus. But there was, in the late 90s and early 2000s, another flurry of suggestions. Baryonyx had been announced, I believe it was in 97, and when Baryonyx was named, all of this other material, some folks had referred it as being the genus Baryonyx. So now, at one point in Seuss et al. 2002, Suchomimus was referred to Baryonyx. It was Baryonyx tenerensis. And most of the authors have suggested that the Cristatusaurus was not useful because it wasn't identifiable. So it was parked. I'm going to add another name into this list, and that's Angatorama. And that specimen is a Brazilian spinosaur that has this premaxillary area. So to recap, we have an animal from Niger that was named Cristatusaurus based off of a premaxilla and a referred premaxilla. And then we have 2 months later, an animal named Suchomimus that was named off of a skeleton is the name, but a skull was referred. Now, all of the ensuing arguments make the de facto assumption that that skull goes with that body. And they then make that logical comparison of Cristatusaurus to the skull of the referred Suchomimus material. Well, why am I making such a big deal about this? It's because if you're trying to sync one genus into another, you need to be able to compare the elements. And we could stop this conversation now because Cristatusaurus is a premaxilla and Suchomimus is a skeleton for the holotypes. No head, no body, no overlap. There's nothing we can do. So there's all kinds of comparisons that state that the Cristatusaurus isn't diagnostic, but the Suchomimus skull clearly would be. And many have noted the great similarity between the two, but because the Cristatusaurus holotype lacks an autapomorphy that they can use to compare to other animals and say, nope, only this Suchomimus Cristatusaurus animal that's living in this horizon has this character. So if you don't have a character to link them, the argument is that animal, the Cristatusaurus, doesn't match. But I ask you, if this premaxilla is identifiable as the same animal as this premaxilla, and this one is not a holotype but referred material, and this one was named first, why can't you blend them together and use Cristatusaurus? Or why can't there be 2 spinosaurs living in the same general time period in the same general location? I don't know why not. Recently, people have decided Baryonyx is not part of this argument. They've decided these are separate from Baryonyx. So I'm not going to talk about Baryonyx anymore. But what I will talk about is this Brazilian specimen. It has a premax. Now, some have synonymized it with Irritator, but the exact same problem. Irritator lacks a premax. And unless this bone is the exact bone that goes with this skull, Irritator cannot subsume or be blended into Angatorama. Under what grounds? Under what reason? You can't compare. There's apples and oranges. And it's one of the downsides of when you name a dinosaur based off of one bone or a few bones, you do the world a disservice because you need to find that exact bone to make these comparisons. We can't say anything because we don't have the right overlapping bones. One argument that's been made, though, is by the paper that just dropped, and what caused this video is, I'm going to call him Pettit. I don't know, apologies if the name is wrong, and it was a great paper. Out of the 23,000 or so words, less than 700 were spent on this synonymy. The rest of it is all about the CT scanning work that he did, which was tremendous. I mean, look at these images. They're gorgeous and stunning. And if you've never played with CT slices, it's the world's worst adult coloring book. You have 1,000 to 2,000 individual slices that you have to pull on a screen and mark what goes where and then stack them together in software. Occasionally you get lucky and the software automatically does it, but for the most part, you don't get lucky and you're doing some coloring. So my hat, if I was wearing one, it would be off. It's already off. To the paper and the author for the tremendous work. You scanned Morletti's crocodile. You scanned Gavial. You did great work bringing extant taxa. You've made a strong argument about the sensitivity of the spinosaurid nose, which is fantastic. And I hope that's what the paper's remembered for. As for the synonymy standpoint, where I stand is pretty simple. I have a holotype of a specimen that I can't compare to the other specimen. Now what Pettit does, which was pretty clever, was on his CT scan, he tracked all of these nerves. And he noted that the adult specimen, the referred specimen, 365, has a nerve going into this premaxillary crest. And then he looks at the 366, which in his own words is heavily damaged, and he shows that that little hole is there as well. So he makes the assumption that the juvenile has a crest, so he adds a crest to it. Now he's making an interesting commentary here, which is the crests themselves, because the juvenile and the adult have the crest is a character not influenced by ontogeny. And therefore, it's kind of circular. They have the crests, so they must be the same taxon. And it can't be, he doesn't mention variation. He doesn't take any of these other taphonomic, sexual, or individual variation into account. He just presumes that is a good feature. It unites it. He argues Suchomimus has it. Therefore, Suchomimus is part of this taxon. But his holotype doesn't actually preserve the crest. We have to assume this nerve goes through, and that's making the basic assumption that these are the exact same taxon, which may or may not be true right out of the gate. Frustrating? Are you irritated, confused? Yeah, join the crowd. Spinosaurs are often seemingly made of rubble or ultra-fragmentary pieces. It boggles my sauropod mind that this is what Spinosaurs are actually comprised of. He also talks about the first alveolus, but in this case, he says, it's ontogeny. One has less teeth than the other. It's variable. So he uses ontogeny, in my opinion, to help. He backs into it. If it's helpful for the cause, great. But if the variation is present and may cause someone to question it, he downplays it. Maybe did it intentionally, maybe not. Maybe I'm misreading the paper entirely. But my take is that ontogeny definitely needs to be considered. So the other camp says, well, Cristatusaurus is a nomen dubium, or it rolls up into, it's clearly Suchomimus. But if it's clearly Suchomimus, it was named first. And since the Suchomimus holotype doesn't have a skull material, if you say it is this Suchomimus skull, this bone and this bone are the same, and if you can go so far as to say that this is that, and you can link them together, well, maybe the Suchomimus skull is Cristatusaurus. The logic can be twisted any number of ways to tell whatever narrative is desired to be told. The end result is Hendricks 2016 did the world a great service in another fantastic paper where they actually figure with photographs and some modern images the 501. We'll call it Levi's as a specimen. Levi was photographed, and we can see and make greater comparisons to the material that was just CT scanned, and we can make our own informed decisions. And there's definitely some similarities there. But with the Brazilian specimen, having a nose crest, even though I find it in the original paper when they described Angatorama, they say that the Niger material doesn't have this premaxillary crest. It's bizarre and wild, the world. Are we all looking at the same bones? But that's why we research and search again. So my take on all of this is it's really fuzzy. the holotype of Suchomimus doesn't have cranial material. So you have to assume that this referral to the skull, that we don't know where it was found. And we know that with Spinosaurus mirabilis, that particular team had no problem referring bones to mirabilis that were 300 miles away on the other side of Niger. So is that the right call? That paper also makes the assumption that there's only one Spinosaur taxon living in this particular time period, which, though logical, is a dangerous assessment considering how many Spinosaurs seemingly roamed around Spain and roamed around South America and roamed around Thailand. It is dangerous. So there's nothing clean and easy. If you've made it this far, and you're probably thinking to yourself, wow, that's not the impression I got from watching videos or reading press releases. And that's because we're deep in the weeds, 17 minutes in, and we haven't resolved anything. That's the world that paleontologists live in. Science communicators, press folks, we need to tell a story around this, but I don't have a story to tell. All I can tell you is there is no clear-cut answer. Please don't name holotypes off of individual bones. Please don't name referred material over there without giving us the information of where the material is from. And if you have a skeleton, please tell us what you have. Which fast forwards to 2022 when Serino and crew did just that. They drew this great diagram that color codes what elements of Suchomimus go to what specimen numbers. And that was super helpful. The problem with this I have is that it draws every bone as complete. Well, I highly doubt that that's the status of every bone. And we still, to this day, this is all I was able to find on the holotype of Suchomimus, the GDF 500, which is a paper, it's a pencil outline. And if you've watched my videos or watched my talks, you know I don't like outlines at all, and I don't trust drawings. And it's frustrating because when I look at this outline of the ischial and pubic boots, what good does that do me? That it was being used for a comparative purpose for a different reason. But as someone who's desperately seeking 500 images or illustrations, you have to go to Serino's lab, I would guess, and study the material there in person. And it's 28 years, so maybe we can someday see the rest of the Suchomimus material. If you're not going to describe it, at least 3D scan it and upload it like you did with all the mirabilis material, where people can spin them around and look at them and make their own judgments. But I'm one to talk because I found a sauropod in 1995 that 31 years later we're finally starting to describe. So these things happen. I don't want to cast aspersion because I'm the person that's doing it himself. I get it. But it is wild to think that the paper that was dropped by Pettit on this fantastic CT scan cranial work on the spinosaurids is largely being talked about because it suggests that Suchomimus should really be called Cristatusaurus. I don't agree with his arguments, but I don't agree with them for the reason that we don't have cranial material with Suchomimus as the holotype, and we don't have postcranial material with Cristatusaurus. Please like, subscribe, enjoy our channel, leave comments below. I try to reply to all of them personally. So I'm Dr. Brian Curtis with Fossil Crate saying thank you kindly. Adios.